Hi, this is Wayne Zell, and welcome back to Blueprint for Wealth for your educational moment. Today, we're going to be talking about the federal budget and what President Biden has proposed as the fiscal year 2023 budget. So let's go ahead and take a look at the slides. We're going to briefly cover an overview of what President Biden has proposed as his 2023 fiscal year federal budget. We'll talk about what mandatory spending is included in that budget and discretionary spending, which is really where Congress sets the appropriations for what they want to spend money on from a discretionary perspective. I'll drill into a little bit on the defense spending, and then we'll talk about receipts that are being used by the government. How are we paying for all of these expenditures today? President Biden's proposals break down as follows, but it's a $5.8 trillion budget in totality for fiscal year 2023. It's really a blueprint of what he hopes to achieve and what the administration hopes to achieve, obviously subject to passage and approval by the U.S. Congress. The mandatory spending constitutes 73% of the overall budget. We'll talk about what mandatory means, but that's $4.2 trillion out of the $5.8 trillion of spending. Discretionary, 27%, amounts to only $1.6 trillion out of the total budget. The receipts that are expected to pay for the budget equal about $4.4 trillion, including Biden's proposed tax increases. That leaves a deficit in 2023 of $1.4 trillion and a projected deficit of $14.4 trillion through 2032. Here's a pie chart that shows generally how things break out. On the mandatory side, you include Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, other, which is kind of amorphous, and interest on the national debt. The discretionary budget consists of defense and non-defense discretionary spending. As I mentioned, mandatory spending includes Social Security and Medicare, and those two items alone account for approximately 40% of all mandatory spending. Medicaid is another $556 billion, and interest on the national debt, which is rising rapidly because interest rates are going up, is projected to be about $400 billion in fiscal year 2023. So this equals about $4.1 trillion, 71 to 73% of all spending. Here's a chart that shows how the discretionary spending breaks out. And as you can see, the vast majority of discretionary spending is dedicated to the defense budget, as well as Veterans Affairs and HHS. But the defense budget is projected to be $773 billion for fiscal year 2023. What are we spending money on in the defense budget? Well, there is a dedication by the Biden administration to increase spending on defense by over $44.5 billion over fiscal year 2022. And in the president's projected budget, he's projecting to increase defense spending by over $20 billion a year for the next 5 years. Much of this spending is dedicated towards deterrent efforts against Russia and China, including a $10 billion shift in resources from within the Defense Department to dedicate towards these deterrent efforts. It also includes more spending on biodefense and pandemic readiness, and technology spending on artificial intelligence, microchips, hypersonic weapons, which is where China has excelled recently, more research and development spending, technology spending, nuclear modernization. The budget also includes climate and energy resilience spending, so that we're not so dependent on oil for our needs. And last but not least, it includes significant increase in Air Force modernization as well as Space Force spending, mostly on satellites. The $4.4 trillion of money that is expected to come in to help pay for the budget, leaving still a deficit of $1.4 trillion, 53% of the receipts generated by the US government come from the individual income tax system. So it's highly dependent on raising taxes in order to spend the money on the things we need to spend money on. 10.5% is spent, comes from the corporate income tax, and another 23% comes from Social Security payroll taxes, and 7.2% comes from Medicare taxes. All in all, income tax, corporate tax, Social Security, and Medicare tax amount to 94% of all receipts that we receive in order to pay for all of the spending. So it's a conundrum that we are faced with in terms of how to raise money to spend the money wisely for the needs that Congress and the president believe are important to spend money on. If you'd like to know more about the tax side of things, the receipt side of things, give us a call at 571-203-9355 or visit us on the web at zelllaw.com, and we'd be happy to talk to you more about the tax increases that may be coming down the pike to help spend the money that the Biden administration has proposed spending for fiscal year 2023. I'm Wayne Zell, and thank you so much for listening to Blueprint for Wealth, and join us next time for a special topic and special guest on Blueprint for Wealth. Have a great week.